Scared. Melanie, you'll give me the hot sign, right?
Good.
Meeting is called to order. Can you call a roll, please?
Here, Wonderman.
Here.
Director Alba. Here. Director Del Bono.
Here.
Director Duke.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Can you please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks. Okay. Welcome to the San Francisco Bay Ferry's Board of Directors meeting. This monthly meeting is being conducted in person and by video conference and is being recorded. To reduce background noise, all video conference participants will be joining in the listen-only mode and muted during the discussion. We welcome comments from the public. A public comment period will be set aside after each discussion period and will be accepted in person and by video conference. Video conference participants wishing to speak are requested to email your name and item number you'd like to comment on to boardofdirectors@sfbayferry.com. If you're unable to send an email, you will be given an opportunity to speak on the item after those who have signed up. So thank you all for being here for the May meeting of SF Bay Ferry. It's nice that in general reading through the report, it's a good thorough report, and where it used to say WETA, it now says SF Bay Ferry. So I appreciate the progress that's being made, Thomas and company, on making us SF Bay Ferry, and I try to remember as much as possible and all the time. Just a couple of quick things. You know, there's commentary in the director's in the director's memo about SB 63 and transportation funding and so forth. And so, you know, I would just say this is a time we really have to be focused on this as a community. It hasn't been really a hallmark time for transportation leadership in a general way. I think, you know, what we've seen is there's been a sort of an erosion of public interest in the subject. We've seen in political interest, and to some degree that's for good reason. And there was the pandemic, and there's less demand on the systems. But we can see that that is changing, and it will change. And my prediction is, within a modest period of time, transportation will rise again to be the top issue of concern amongst Bay Area residents. It's going to happen. You can kind of feel it brewing. And so, unlike some other issues that get political attention, transportation, you can't just solve it today, tomorrow. It's a long-term game, and you have to be prepared for it, and you have to put the pieces in place to be ready, because it requires so much capital funding and infrastructure planning, things that take time, things that require a lot of human and financial resources. So, you know, I think it's really important that we, you know, see ourselves as leaders. I think as an organization, when you look at our ridership report, the fact that people have come back to SF Bay Ferry in such big numbers is an indication, you know, of a leadership role. And Seamus, you know, is nothing if not a great transportation leader who's respected by his peers and colleagues throughout this sort of broader transportation industry and stakeholders in the Bay Area. So, you know, this is kind of our time. Just because we're doing a bill that puts a regional measure before the voters doesn't assure its passage. Bills haven't, you know, these measures haven't done well in recent years. Several of them have failed or failed to go on the ballot because it was clear that they wouldn't succeed. You know, where the heads are of transportation folks like us and politicians like people we work with can be very different from where the voters live. And the voters are definitely, if you look at any of the numbers. They're really concerned about inflation, the cost of living, sort of the pressures of day-to-day life. So we have, I think, a lot of work to do and a role to play in this to try to move the needle on that. So we're not just developing hopefully this measure will get through and we can support it. And we'll see about that. It's not, nothing is easy. I hope multiple, a couple of counties that have been kind of sitting on the sidelines will come into it and make it bigger. That would be, I think, better. But we need to play a leadership role in this. To wit, we have a visit tomorrow from Representative Rick Larson from Washington State, who is not only the congressman where our boats are built. A lot of our vessels are actually built in his district, which Tim, we're going to change in the future, but for now that remains the truth. But he's coming to visit, but he's also the ranking member of the House of Representatives Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. So he's a very important person. He's one step away from being the chairman of that committee, depending upon who controls the House of Representatives. And so we're going to take him on a ferry tour tomorrow, and he's very interested. And I think Lauren and Seamus visited with him a couple of weeks ago in Washington D.C., and we're going to do that again, and really try to have a relationship with somebody who's going to be very, very important to us, as well as other leading officials in the Department of Transportation and in Sacramento, and mayors and key influencers around the region. So this is as Mikey said in the Goonies, this is our time. We have to stand up to this and expect a little bit of pushback as we come forward and say, we've got a good transportation network, but it's got to be a lot better for the future of the region. So I'm excited about that. The only other thing I wanted to mention is I was included on a board of advisors for a group I get it's called the SF Peninsula, and it's actually the direct marketing organization for the peninsula, especially San Mateo County. So their role, it's a bunch of hotels and other officials involved in increasing tourism in San Mateo County. So I went to the meeting yesterday, and we went around the room and talked about stuff. But I noted they went through a lot of really good process to think about. How many of you are from San Mateo County? We have a few folks. So they talked about what it would take to get more people to come to San Mateo County. What would be an attraction? And one of the things that was really high on the list was like waterfront activity. And so I said, well, one of the things we could consider would be, we're already trying to build or along the way to build a terminal in Redwood City, but we also could build a terminal maybe we could build a terminal in Burlingame, and we could maybe serve SFO. And that would be a real game changer. Well, when I said that, there was like applause in the room. I wasn't necessarily expecting that. I thought people would start like crossing themselves, but they actually was a lot of excitement from people whose role it is to promote San Mateo County. So, Seamus, I think it's time for us to kind of get serious about looking at San Mateo County and the peninsula and kind of filling in that blank and seeing if there is some way that we could be, we could play a distinctive role in causing ferry service to go to kind of the mid-peninsula area short of Redwood City that would make the Redwood City trip, I think, more rational in some ways by having something in between South San Francisco and Redwood City. So I appreciate working on that. Let's talk about maybe how to proceed on that. So that's all I have for you. It's my stream of thinking for today. And again, thanks for all the work you do. It's exciting to see the report and to see that we're going to be providing service for the new teams, and the Valkyries are going to be the benefit now of our service and other, more special service, which is, so in demand. It makes so much sense to do that, and and it's good business sense for us. So with that, I will turn it over to Director Alba, who had the pleasure of welcoming our newest vessel into the fleet.
Exactly. So on April 25th, at the end of Climate Week, we had a commissioning ceremony for MV Carl. And so together with the chair of California Air Resources Board, Leanne Randolph, we and a staff member from Senator or Diaz's office or some. Sorry, Garamendi's office. Sorry, yes. And it was a fantastic day and always a pleasure being out on a new vessel, and especially this one that is so, it's the cleanest vessel of its class in the world, with Tier 4 engine and diesel particulate filters, representing the most advanced diesel emissions technology currently available for marine vessels. And MV Carl provides a 50% reduction in smog-producing emissions and 80% reduction of particulate pollution, delivering a major improvement in air quality for communities around the bay. And I think we all felt it when we were on the boat as well. So it was a fantastic day, and I felt honored to be part of the ceremony. With that, I'm handing it over to Director Del Bono.
And I have nothing to add. I'll give it to Director Dale.
No report either.
All right, moving on. Thank you. And that is really exciting. And, you know, I think to have the cleanest vessel of its kind, you know, in our fleet, you know, really says a lot about the leadership we're providing in you know, making ferries what they really need to be, which is a really clean and green way of transporting people, including being a really fun way. Director Murphy, all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Wonderman. Always good to talk about us being a part of something that's best in the world and not just something that's best or first in the country. So anytime we can do that, we definitely need to take advantage of it. Thanks to the team here that put that event together. Really just great event, really great participation from folks. Thank you for your comments, Chair Wonderman, about San Mateo County. You'll be, I think, happy to know I have no less than 2 emails this morning from San Mateo County officials who are anxious to talk about some of that discussion. So we'll be in touch about that soon. And I want to invite Lauren Ghilardi up to talk about the Public Ferry Coalition, especially as it relates to Congressman Larson visiting us. We did have a good visit with him in Washington, D.C. as a part of the California Transit Association set of meetings. I think there he was also, Lauren also had a chance to meet with him with the PVA, Passenger Vessel Association delegation that was out there at the same time. He's well aware of the work that we're doing and should be, because we're investing quite a bit of revenue in his district specifically. And he for sure would like to work with us to be able to do more of that and to increase the funding for the programs that we know we're going to depend on in the long term to be able to expand our fleet and expand our services, operate more services to more parts of the bay. Hopefully we can do, and he's aware of this because we brought it up, we can do a lot more of that construction and procurement of vessels here in the Bay Area. As we've talked about, that's a priority for our agency, but there's no doubt about it, a lot of what we do is going to happen in Washington State just because of the gravity that they have in the maritime industry. The Public Ferry Coalition, Lauren has just done a tremendous job organizing this group, and they are a big part of that federal advocacy effort to Congressman Larson and others, and wanted to give her a chance to update the board on the status of the coalition.
Thanks. So the Public Ferry Coalition has been around, but it was really a loose knit group of federal lobbyists from a couple of the largest ferry systems around the country. We've really changed that. We've integrated more staff. We've focused on more than just federal advocacy to make it worthwhile for staff on all different levels, operations, administration, but with the main goal of using it as a federal advocacy tool for making sure that federal ferry funding programs, which is really hard to say, remain available and remain funded at reasonable levels for the size of ferry systems in the United States. We've been able to formalize it over the last year and get some voting procedures put in place so that we can advocate at the federal level. So all of that kind of took a little bit of time over the last year, and thanks to Lexi, we were able to build out a website. So we're actually kind of a real organization now with a website and a logo, thanks to the help of Lexi and her team. And we're growing our membership. So we've had a lot of new members recently, luckily from a lot of Republican districts. We have Jacksonville in Florida, Texas DOT just joined, Illinois, Illinois, and a couple of others that I on my list to reach out to. So it's growing and it seems to be working. When we were out there with CTA and the Passenger Vessel Association last week, was it? Seems like it was longer ago than last week. We were able to meet with a whole bunch of different public ferry operators and go to committee staff meeting, go to talk to staff of the committees that are going to be working on the surface transportation reauthorization, to remind them that ferries exist, to remind them the value of ferry service in US communities all over the country, different kinds of communities, rural, small, big, and for different purposes, recreational, economic development. So there's a whole different slew of reasons why ferries provide value across the country. And it's really helpful to have an organization that speaks with that one voice, because we don't really work within ACTA or CTA that has so many other bus and rail agencies that we really just get drowned out. So that is very helpful. And we will be meeting, we were able to score a meeting with the FTA administrator, that's the incoming FTA administrator, Mark Molinaro, on Tuesday of next week. So to continue that discussion and make sure that he understands the value of ferry service around the country. So the website URL is in the packet, and happy to have you guys look at it and love to provide it. If you guys have any input, we'd love to be able to take it back and make it better.
Thank you, Lauren. I will skip ahead to the ridership report. Gabe will give us an update on where ridership stands. Lots of good news to report here.
Good afternoon, Board of Directors. Gabriel Chan, Transportation Planner here at WETA. So encouraging news for this ridership report for May. Closing the packet, it includes data for both April and March. So of note, we outperformed projections in the budget in terms of ridership by about 9% for both months. So compared to 2019, we're at about 88% of pre-pandemic March ridership and 92% of pre-pandemic April ridership. And so another thing of note with these numbers is this time of year is when we kind of get into the projection season for the following year. So back in FY25, we made some pretty aggressive projections for this March and April and May and June timeframe, and we're hitting those right now. So it's encouraging to see that. And then this is also serving as the basis for next year's projection, which we're re-upping with some pretty aggressive numbers in FY26. So we'll see how that pans out, but so far it's going well. Happy to take questions.
It's great to see that. I like to look at those bars and see that we're come so far back, you know, toward pre-pandemic ridership, and that the trends are so good. And you know, as a frequent rider, you know, you can feel it's palpable on the vessels now, because for now we're trying to find the right seat because there's somebody next to us all the time. So it's good. We love having company.
Great. Thank you, Gabe. Chair Wonderman, you have a financial statement report, legislative reports, and the service reliability report in your packet. Nothing to call out there, but staff is available and happy to answer any questions about those or anything else in the executive director report.
Yeah, I asked that Erin provided a memo on the state of things to sort of describe the budget. So you haven't read her memo for this month. It's the best memo you could get, basically saying that everything is going well financially for the organization. We're ahead of budget in virtually every single category, and there's nothing to report of that even approaches a calamity. So unless you didn't mean it, Erin, I think we can move on. Other board members have questions about the finances? Okay, thank you.
Chair Wonderman, that concludes the executive director's report.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll move on to the consent calendar. There's 4 items, A, B, C, and D on the consent calendar. I won't read them, but if any member of the board would like to have an item removed, this would be the time to say it. Any member of the public wish to have an item separated from the consent calendar that causes you concern?
Nobody has been speak either.
Good.
Make a motion to move consent.
Second?
Yep, we have a motion, and a second on the consent calendar. Can you call the roll, please?
Chair Wonderman,
Yes.
Director Alba,
Yes.
Director Del Bono,
Yes.
and Director Duke.
Yes.
Terrific. Item 7, Alameda Ferry Terminals Memorandum of Understanding.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'll take this one. We are moving forward with and recommending that the board authorize us to enter into this MOU with the city of Alameda. The seaplane operating amendment included some language that gave Alameda the right to implement paid parking at the seaplane and Harbor Bay lots. It also allowed us to have a discussion with them about the TIF funding that's provided to support Harbor Bay, and about ceasing to provide that TIF. That's not something that they can unilaterally decide to cease providing that TIF, but not without through this agreement clarified that we should have a discussion about that. And in those discussions which have occurred, we've raised the issue of security at the Harbor Bay, Main Street, and Seaplane lots, and they've raised the issue about parking and implementing paid parking at those lots. So our goals in exchange for not having access to the TIF funding, and it does amount to about $500,000 a year to support service to Harbor Bay. Our goals were to provide our riders with some amenities or some new benefits, and security has been an issue just about everywhere that cars park in the Bay Area for some time, and Alameda ferry terminal lots are no exception. So we communicated to city staff that we would like them in their responsibility to maintain those lots, which is established through other agreements with them. We would like them to take on the provision of security at those lots and provide our customers with assurance that their valuables will be safe, that their cars will be safe while they park there. So we've reached a good place with city staff where they've agreed to provide security at the Seaplane and Harbor Bay lots. Seaplane, Harbor Bay first, and then phasing in Seaplane later as parking fees are established at those lots, and then eventually at Main Street. And we think that's a really important benefit for us to communicate to our riders that they're getting that at the same time parking fees are established. We also were concerned about the impact that parking fees might have on ridership. And so this MOU includes significant protections against any impacts on ridership. It includes a phased-in approach where the fees would be established only at times when the lots reach capacity or near capacity. Right now, that means Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for the Harbor Bay and Seaplane lots. And we also have language in the MOU that allows us to revisit the parking fees if there is any impact on ridership. If the MOU is implemented as we've outlined, then we think ridership will the impact on ridership will be avoided. Hopefully, ridership will continue to grow there. We have every expectation that it will. People will feel safe parking their vehicle there, safer than they do today, perhaps because of the enhanced security. And so that should be a ridership driver. And if anything is not followed in this MOU, there's language that allows us to continue to resume our request for the TIF funding and have that restored for Harbor Bay. But again, it isn't a decision that we can unilaterally make, and they can unilaterally make the decision to not provide the TIF funding. So that's where things stand. We think this is in a good place. It's been in the works for quite some time, and we're recommending the board allow us to enter into the agreement.
Yeah, thanks. It seems like a reasonable approach to, the challenges that we've had there. Questions from board members? Any? Go ahead.
You know how
Director
much
Duke.
the parking is?
They will, somewhere about $3 is where they'll start.
Probably won't go down. It usually goes up.
Yeah, well, I'm just comparing it with Vallejo being, yeah, $8.
Yeah, that's more.
Yeah,
Yeah, they are. So that was one thing we insisted on, is to start low.
Yeah.
And see if there is any impact on ridership, and make adjustments if
Yeah.
there is an impact
Yeah.
on ridership. I think ultimately we would like to have some uniformity across the system.
sure.
But it's difficult when we have different jurisdictions in charge of the different parking facilities that
Sure.
serve our system.
And so this would be, Vallejo is currently the only one that has a parking fee in our system, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
There's a parking fee at Jack London, but ferry riders get it removed when they validate their ticket.
Director Alvin.
Just to follow up on parking fees. I think it's important to just keep in mind that the fee should be set on demand, or related to demand. So if lots fill up, if the facilities fill up, then that warrants a higher fee, right? And if they're not filling up, then that should warrant lower fees. And so a system-wide fee, a fee program, yes, that we can work with the local jurisdictions makes sense, but there needs to be flexibility in what the actual fee per day or per hour is, depending on demand. So that's my only comment, but I really appreciate this work and drafting this MOU. I think it's a good step forward.
Excellent. Other comments, questions? Very good. Is there anyone signed up to comment on this from the public?
Nobody has signed up.
Anyone wish to speak on item 7? If not, can I get a motion on item 7?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second, we have competition.
Yeah.
Let's call the roll.
Chair Wonderman,
Yes.
Director Alba,
Yes.
Director Del Bono.
Yes.
And Director Duke. Yeah. And.
Okay, great. Approved contract award to Alliant Insurance Services, Inc. for insurance brokerage and risk management services.
Thank you, Chair Wonderman. Today we have Seth Cole from Alliant here with us remotely, representing the winning bidder in this process. We released they are a current broker, and their contract expires at the end of this fiscal year. So we in January released an RFP for new insurance brokerage and advisory services. We only received 2 bidders, which I think is really just a function of sort of the niche area that we occupy in terms of being both a public agency and marine agency. And there aren't that many really qualified firms out there for that, maybe only 1 or 2 more. The procurement was open for 6 weeks, and we not only received complete and very quality proposals from the 2 bidders. We also interviewed them and had a couple follow-up questions for both bidders and trying to get the right fit for us going forward. And it was actually both proposals were very close. They were both very good, but in the end, the team chose to stay with Alliant for the next contract. In addition to, we appreciated the good service they've given us to date. They also have a very experienced team. It's the same team that we've had for years. And the other thing that came up during the interviews that I think we're really trying to prepare for in the future is the electrification of the service and how that would affect our liability. And Alliant also represents Washington State Ferries, who are also going through some similar discussions. And we had some pretty good detailed discussions during the process around what we would need to do for that. And we felt like they were ready for that challenge. So we recommend awarding the next contract to Alliant as well. And this action before you is to approve, a contract for up to $480,700. So if you have any questions.
Insurance. Board members, any questions on what's being presented with regard to insurance? guess we're lucky having you.
It's a good thing.
A good thing. That's important. Any member of the public, signed up, Melanie, on item 8?
No one has signed up to speak.
Did Seth want to say a word?
That's the one.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Just wanted to thank you for your support. We greatly appreciate the partnership, and we look forward to the continued work that we're doing with SF Bay Ferry. I wanted to say WETA, but I didn't.
See, I know it's tempting,
Good job.
right? But you caught yourself. That's what you have to do. Okay, very good. Any further questions or comments? Let's get a motion on item 8.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion and a second. And let's have a roll call.
Chair Wonderman.
Yes.
Director Alba,
Yes.
Director Del Bono.
Yes.
And Director Du.
Yes.
Super,
Director
thank
Del
you.
Bono, did you second?
Yeah,
Okay,
yes.
Great, thank you. The item passes.
Okay, item number 9, award on-call professional services contract.
All right, good afternoon, Director Wonderman, board members. I'm Jeff Powell, Senior Project Manager. Let me start first by saying this was a department effort. This goes across all departments within the organization. Everybody had a little bit of hand in this, even though it was definitely an interesting procurement that we got through. And part of what allows us to be so successful is the support from professional service from our consultants, right? So the novel implementation of the REEF program, along with the increasing repair and maintenance work on our capital program, is expanding. It's going to require additional support in the future to be successful. On-call contracts have been especially effective in the past, allowing us to align the consulting services with specific needs as they arise. And in the past, we've undertaken procurements specific to a certain service area. This procurement, we took a slightly different approach by combining 6 categories that the proposers could bid on. The first being planning, permitting, and environmental services. The second being marine vessel engineering services. The third being marine facilities engineering services. The fourth being landside facilities and engineering services. The fifth being marine vessel construction management services. And the sixth being facilities construction management services. There was a wide range with some detailed specifications for each one of those categories. We required that a proposal be able to demonstrate qualifications for at least one of those categories, although they had the ability to bid on all 6 of them. We issued this RFP in December, following all the required FTA guidelines, procurement, and documented such in the project folders. We received a very strong response to this from 40 excellent professional service teams. SF Bay Ferry evaluations resulted all 40 of these teams being selected, and for one or more of the service categories, resulting in 60 recommended placements in the categories. The firms and resulting category placements are outlined in the board memo in the matrix. I'd be happy to go over that if you'd like to. Some highlights: 2 of the teams had DBE firms as primes. 8 had SBE firms as primes, and along with many other teams, including DBE SBA subconsultants, demonstrating strong DBE SBE involvement amongst the mix of proposals. If the board approves this award today, SF Bay Ferry will then negotiate with each consultant team. If successful, execute a 5-year agreement with not to exceed amount of $2 million per category covered by the proposed agreement. Work will be executed by the firms only based on task order basis, for each of the categories which the team was selected, with that amount not to exceed $2 million. Any task orders issued would be part of the capital budget program for the project the task order is intended for that fiscal year. It's staff's recommendation to approve the award of these 40 agreements for this on-call procurement, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I thought this sort of a coming of age for SF Bay Ferry to do this, and to you have a very capable team, and I think the notion of coming back to the board every time we need to do something is something we need to mitigate where we can do that. And it seemed to me in the reading and your presentation that we went through this, you guys went through this process in a very thoughtful, not perfunctory way. And my sense of it is that it's I'm glad to be able to support it, and I think it's going to make us leaner and more nimble be able to operate this way. And, you know, it's always a little bit of a risk in these things, you know, but I think it's de minimis. So that's my view of it. I appreciate it. What's any board members' comments, questions on this?
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is fantastic. So we're looking at only the primes for those who have bigger teams, or are the subs included in this list too?
So the subs will be part of the team. What you see there with the X and check marks,
Mhm.
those are the primes.
These are the primes. So if we have, did you say 26?
40,
Or
40,
40.
40,
But out of those, how many?
60
Wait.
check marks.
You received 40, but you only selected, so there are only like 26 here or something like that, right? 26. And now I can't remember it, but it's over 20. But that's a lot of consultants to be working with. And so we, like, for every prime, there might be more subs, right? Which is fantastic. I just remember from working on a massive on-call for BART and just managing all of the sub-consultants in addition to the prime and expectations, just so we keep that in mind. And then you've dedicated 2 million per 5 years or per stream for a 5-year cycle. Across these 6 categories, is there one category that you think you'll max out the $2 million within the first few years compared to some of the other ones where you will have like 2 million will extend through the 5 years? Or do you think that will be an issue?
I don't believe it's going to be an issue. I believe we set that dollar amount based on history so that we could get through these 5 years period of the worst case scenario.
That's fantastic. That it's working out that well. Great. I think those were my comments. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the work coming out of each stream.
We are too.
Yeah.
Oh, and who were the 2 PBE firms that are priming?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know if Terrence is here to kind of lean on that a little bit, but I can get back to you on that.
Are we putting you on the spot, Terrence, if you're unmuted?
Hi, yes. I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't have it right in front of me, but I can pull that up and I'll get it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it. No other comments?
Okay, thank you. Other comments from board members? Are there any members of the public signed up on item 9, Melanie?
Nobody has signed up to speak.
Anyone wish to comment on item number 9 from the public, either in person or in the virtual world? Okay, thanks for the work, and we need a motion on item 9.
So moved. Second.
We have motion and second, so please call the roll.
Chair Wonderman,
Yes.
Director Alba,
Yes,
Director Del Bono.
Yep.
And Director Hughes. The item passes.
and then it's 40.
Okay, next items are informational items. Item 10, South San Francisco Service Study.
Thank you, Chair Wonderman. Directors, Tom Hall, Director of Operations and Customer Experience. Happy to come talk to you about, for a change, not the rosiest news, but we do have some service that we operate that hasn't quite grown in the way that we would have hoped. And so South San Francisco Ferry Services is top of that list. It's been discussed at times at the board level. And so staff has been working hard across the divisions to come up with a plan to really study the situation on that route and potential solutions. And so we wanted to provide as an informational item the plan for our service study for South San Francisco. We really have 3 key outcomes that we want to hit as a result of the study and a potential solution that we would bring back to you at the end of the study. Ensure financial feasibility for ferry service in South San Francisco, increase the service productivity on the route, and establish a sustainable runway so that we can continue to serve that community for years to come. South San Francisco, as many of you know, had the lowest ridership in the system before the pandemic. That's continued after in the past 3.5 years since we relaunched South San Francisco's service in October of 2021. It's still the lowest. It does, due to the nature of the service, it has a relatively high cost to operate as it's currently structured. That's in part due to the distance from the East Bay origins for that route and the lack of interlining options. So it kind of sticks out. If you look at a map of our system, it sticks out a little bit. It's pretty far away and it's hard to connect to other terminals based on where that vessel has to go afterwards. It's a little too far for a one vessel service, so you need to throw 2 vessels on it. That second vessel then needs to go do something else, and it makes it hard to make connections. There's just some structural issues that we want to really study and look through and see how we can solve. Current and future riders will be centered through the working group process. We want to make sure that current riders and potential future riders are really at the center of what we're looking at here in terms of solutions. The working group process will collaboratively determine a path forward, and we're going to be working with a wide range of stakeholders, including labor, employers in the business community, policymakers at the staff and elected levels, and our transportation partners on both sides of the bay. And then the plan is to do that over the next 5 or 6 months, bring back a consensus solution from that working group to the board. Any major service changes done at that point would follow our normal process for public outreach and public comment at that period. But we're going in with an open mind to see where the process takes us. As I mentioned, this is a cross-divisional project here. The planning team led by Mike Gowerty, who couldn't be here, is heavily involved, and Dory Fanaki and Gabe Chan can help answer any questions you may have about the performance analysis that they have done leading up to this process. Lauren Gallardi's team is also going to be very involved in building that stakeholder group, make sure that we're hearing all of the voices that need to be heard on this. With that, this is an informational item, but we're happy to entertain feedback and questions.
Thank you. So I have a couple. So how much of this is a function of how many people are working at Genentech versus now versus before? I know that, as you said, the ridership wasn't too good before, but how much of the problem is geared toward people working remotely at the big, very large employer, fairly adjacent to the terminal?
That's certainly a factor. I think we're seeing on our biggest days, our Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, numbers that are roughly approaching the norm before the pandemic at that service, just as we are elsewhere in our system. However, that's been a long time coming. That's had to grow very slowly over the past 3.5 years. It was definitely a laggard in that respect. There are new employers. Theoretically, there should be more riders on that route because major new employers, including Stripe, have opened offices down there.
Yeah.
I think generally we're seeing more reluctant return to office there. And there have been some workforce reductions in that area as well at some of the major employers. So I think it's a number of factors. We would have expected, had there not been a pandemic, we would have expected a big uptick. Given that we're not seeing that compared to other employers, certainly San Francisco has a huge office vacancy issue, no different than South San Francisco, probably worse than South San Francisco based on the data. So definitely a factor. Mondays and Fridays are an enormous drop off from where they were before the pandemic, similar to the commute time travel on our other routes.
Are there private services operating alongside ours?
So Genentech does operate a private ferry service. I believe it connects to Berkeley, operated by a private operator, similar to what they did before the pandemic. Of course, they also have their buses that go all over the Bay Area, all over the region as well.
And finally, land use. There was talk at different times about building stuff around that terminal, but I don't know whatever really kind of came to fruition. Is there a consideration of any changes in the surrounding land use that would attract more people around to the terminal, because it really is just for people coming and going?
Yeah, that's a great question. There has been some work along those lines, I think, through the stakeholder process, through the working group process. Learning about what's coming down the pike at Oyster Point will be an important consideration on the consensus solution that we bring back to the board.
Thank you. Board members?
I'll just add, I know it's been a concern of mine. I mean, this service has never really picked up. It's, you know, it's going below where we expected it to. It's progressively gotten worse. And I think the thing to point out too, one of the things is we've approached Genentech and others to see if, you know, we can get some help or what's out there to keep the service going. That we have a lot of routes that have high demand, and with our limitation on boats and the high demand coming from other areas, like I'm definitely in favor of looking at what our options are for the future, so we can enhance other areas of the service. If this isn't we don't see this in the short term being area that's going to be fixed. So that's my.
I mean, one option would be to go to smaller boats, right?
Definitely something that'll be on the table. We don't have smaller boats than we currently
Right.
run there, so it would be either partnering with an operator that does have those smaller boats or procuring new smaller boats. That's definitely one of the options that we looked at internally that we'll be bringing to the stakeholders.
Yeah, I think the data that you provide in the report and have mentioned here, nearly 60% would drive alone to South San Francisco if they didn't take the ferry. And so continuing the discussions with Genentech and the Oyster Point Coalition to see what can be done in regards to some kind of agreement, like financial agreement, to make this more financially sustainable for us. A 15% fare box recovery is, like you're stating in the report, compared to 25% on average for our other routes, it's much lower. It's still within the range for public transit, right? And so I would love to see us really thinking about the options and making this work in the future, but also understand that if we can't find a solution, then that's it, right? So I'm hoping something will come out from this process and engaging the coalition and the employers, as well as considering the size of the vessel, etc. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Others? Any members of the public on item 10?
Nobody has signed up.
We have someone here.
We have one. Come on up.
Hello, thank you. Isabel, I was a former South City ferry rider. That's how I learned about the ferry service. And so while I'm not an active rider on that route, I just want to share a few anecdotal pieces from my perspective of being a regular rider of that service for probably a year and a half previously. I know, I think it's tricky because it is a very Genentech heavy group that uses it. I was not a Genentech person, but a lot of connecting buses and such are Genentech, are serviced by Genentech, so no one else can use them. And so the connecting service for anyone who's not Genentech ends up being very difficult. I was only able to do it because there's a beautiful bike route along the bay, and that ended up being really helpful. And I just I have an electric scooter, so I'd scoot to and from the last like mile and a half to work. But that meant that if it rained, I couldn't do that because it just wasn't safe for me to do that. So it was tricky in that way. Sorry. And then also, like, I know there was like a Mission Bay connection that was attempted at one time, and that was really tricky because it was like a route that got added after the rest of the routes, which made sense for the consistency of the service. But I remember whenever I did want to go into San Francisco after work, I would do this really wild thing where I would take the ferry back to Jack London, drive home to Castro Valley, then take BART from Castro Valley back into the city, which meant I was like, not getting into the city in probably like 8 or 9, which maybe wasn't the most logical route, but just in terms of what I needed to be where in terms of my transit options, that was what ended up working best for me. I'm not sure if like any sort of service, because it does sound like there were people who live in Mission Bay area who were also interested in taking the ferry down to Oyster Point, but they didn't have an easy connection. Obviously, you're going to be studying all these things, so you'll probably find a lot of what I'm saying right now, but just and then also like airport connections. In fact, the airport was very close, but I did also end up doing some really wild, weird loop-de-doops in order to go to the airport when I was trying to take the ferry service as my regular route, because driving there sucks so bad. So yeah, it is a valuable ferry connection service for the people who regularly use it. It is a very regular group who uses it, like probably like in terms of interacting with people on the ferry and getting to know like crews from the ferry. That route was the one where I've made the most connections. But I also understand like in terms of reports and everything, it is, yeah, it is a tricky one. Anyways.
Thank you very much. It's enlightening. I hope you'll find a way to participate in the working group and, you know, appreciate your patronage when you were patronizing. Other members of the public wish to comment?
I had a question.
Yeah.
If I might. Robert Estrada, I'm the president of the Inland Boatmen's Union.
Come on up.
You gotta,
Well, I was going to ask.
you gotta get the mic in.
You gotta get mic'd in.
Okay, hi, Robert Estrada, I'm president of the Inland Boatmen's Union. We represent deckhands on San Francisco Bay Ferry. I'm just curious. So as Director Delbono said that we had approached Genentech to see if there was any assistance to be had there. And first of all, I was wondering if we ever got any results or any indication that there might be some help to be had there. And then also, I'm wondering if we've approached the city of South San Francisco similarly to see if there's any help that might be gotten there. Because while I understand the difficulties and they're real and things have to be triaged and prioritized, certainly also true that once infrastructure is removed, it's a lot harder for it to ever come back, as I think you are implying, Director Alba. So I was just wondering if between Genentech and the city of South San Francisco, if there is any hope of assistance or anywhere else.
Yeah, I could take that. It's TBD. We have had some good conversations. It's clear that the employers at Oyster Point really value the service, and so they wanted to stick around. They're obviously paying for their own private service from some other locations too. They subsidize in a large part the fares of their employees that use our service, and so maybe there's an incremental additional investment that would help make this service more financially sustainable. They understand that. And they're giving it some serious thought. We're going to be in continued conversations with them as we do this analysis. The city, I think, is a different story. Not that they don't value the service, they do. It's just that they are in a different place as far as means to support additional operations of anything, really, like any jurisdiction that exists these days. The county of San Mateo does have some programs to provide operating assistance for regional transit. Unfortunately, it's for new regional transit connections and not for existing regional transit connections. So it can't supplant any funding that's being provided for existing services today. I think we're going to end up in a good place at the end of this study. I think we'll probably end up with some ideas about how to make the service more financially sustainable through a combination of different strategies. Hopefully employer contributions will be one of those.
Thank you. That was a very thorough answer. I appreciate it.
I know I encounter as a ferry rider from Jack London, I sometimes encounter the South City route and the people lined up for that. And, you know, while it's not a huge crowd, it is a crowd, you know, and to Director Alba's point, you know, to all those people then getting in their car to kind of circumvent the ride you talked about. It does seem that would be really unfortunate. So I hope we can figure out something. And if I can be of any help to the Bay Area Council, because some of those employers there are our members, and you know we have our committee on water transit. You know that might be a place to kind of convene some folks if we can be helpful to see if we can get more employer or city or county involvement in it. And you know, as we develop Mission Bay, things may change when, by the nature of the things that we're doing with Redwood City and Mission Bay. Of course, those things aren't for a little while, but, eventually I see it as being an opportunity to really get San Mateo County in the mix in a big way. And South San Francisco was always a little bit of an outlier and performed that way, but it could be part of a working system, perhaps. Okay, let's take, do we have a motion on 10?
Information.
What's that?
Just an information.
It's information, so we're now taking action. Thank you. Let's go to, thanks, Thomas. Item 11 is SF Bay Ferry long-term financial outlook.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take this one. Also an information item. And it's connected in some way to the previous item because we do owe the board, as you consider the FY26 budget, an update on the longer term financial sustainability of the service. And there's been some recent cost drivers that have had an impact on our fiscal runway and fiscal cliff, depending on what you want to call it. So we want to give the board an understanding of what those cost drivers are, how they are going to impact our long-term outlook, and some of the things that we can do to improve that situation in the near term and in the long term. So we have seen costs increase from FY25. You see that in the budget, which is the next item. A large part of that cost increase is due to anticipated increases in vessel crew labor, a big jump by 21% there. And that's due to new agreements with our represented labor that will increase wages for crews and captains to be on par with the wages that are received by them for their service on the Golden Gate Ferry system, something that we've long tried to remedy and now have an opportunity to do that with Regional Measure 3 funding being made available, but doing it in this jump from FY25 to 26 has an impact, and that impact is compounded over future years. So it has a corresponding impact on the fiscal cliff for our current service and future planned services. We also have more vessels in the fleet. So more vessels require more cost to be able to maintain, never mind operate. And there's a corresponding 10% increase in O&M and vessel O&M and facility O&M associated with that. Also, bridge toll revenues, we anticipated in our last update to you in October of last year that bridge toll revenues, meaning bridge traffic, would come back in a more meaningful way than it has. And so we now know that bridge toll revenues are continuing to be lower for a longer period of time. They're currently 86% of what they were pre-pandemic. All of those factors add up to a different fiscal cliff picture than what we saw in October. The existing network, if we're going to continue to operate what we operate today without any changes, without any effort to find new revenues, without any effort to reduce costs or control costs in some way, in FY 2033, we would run out of our RM3 operating funding reserves. And those reserves are replenished every year, but not in an amount that's sufficient to make up for the costs and the uses of those funds every year. So they are gradually depleted at a larger rate than they're replenished. And by FY 2033, just operating our existing network, we would hit our fiscal cliff. If we add Treasure Island to the mix, and Treasure Island is anticipated to be added as a service within this 26 to 38 timeframe, there's obviously a larger need here. There is an understanding that the city and county of San Francisco, through our agreements with them and with the developer group that is building Treasure Island, there's an understanding that they will provide the operating revenues to sustain that service through some maybe a tolling policy that's been under discussion for some time, maybe some other revenue generation means. And so there is at least some effort and attention being paid to finding the funding to be able to operate the Treasure Island service. We're building a new terminal at Mission Bay. And so adding Mission Bay and Treasure Island to the mix, you see that reduces the fiscal cliff by a year, takes us to 2032. That would require new operating revenue. You can see that jump from 233 million over that 26 to 38 year time frame to 270. Berkeley being added is another significant cost driver, and that would shorten the fiscal cliff by another year to 2031. You can see the dollar amounts needed to sustain that service over time, and it is planned to be operated within this time frame. And then the existing network, Tier 1 20 plus the Tier 1 2050 service vision is the cost of adding Redwood City to those other services. So we have been spending some time thinking about what we can do.
Why, just a quick interruption,
Sure.
why, you go back one, why wouldn't that affect 2031? Because you've got that on top of, the Berkeley, right? And you add in Redwood City, but it doesn't move forward the fiscal cliff.
Yeah, good question. So it means that the fiscal, we hit the 20, we go to 2031 by just a little bit. So if you hit the fiscal cliff by $1, go over by $1 in any year under this analysis, you're hitting the fiscal cliff. So we hit it by just a little bit in 2031 with Berkeley being added, and we have enough to not to be able to operate Redwood City and not be impacted by another full year, taking us to 2030. We can still sustain the service through 2031.
But it's still a good question, James, because between the other ones, it's, a 40 to 60,000 or what am I saying here? 40 to $60 million difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
175 to 233, 233 to 270, 270 to 326. This one is 110 million.
Yeah, I think there's fair revenue factors at play too. So there's some give and take on the revenue side. We're not just counting RM3 revenue, we're counting other revenues and incremental costs. So it does not cause a full year of fiscal cliff impact to add Redwood City. So we have been thinking about things that we can do to be able to minimize this impact, to be able to lengthen our runway. And there are some near-term strategies that we've contemplated and will be evaluating over the next fiscal year. None of these are being proposed as a part of the FY26 budget, but one of the reasons why we're bringing this to your attention now is that we could begin this analysis, maybe even accelerate some of this analysis and bring it back to the board for a potential mid-year budget adjustment. And obviously, the sooner we implement some of these things, the better. Our recommendation with the FY26 budget is to look at these things, perhaps propose them as a part of the FY27 budget, depending on how things go. And one of the strategies that we'll be assessing is how things go with the SB 63 regional revenue measure and what might be included for ferry operations as a part of that measure. We don't want to take steps that make ferry service worse around the region at a time when voters might be asked to consider funding it. So that is top of mind as well. Reducing service on the Central Bay routes, it would have a service impact, obviously, by reducing crews there, but it does achieve some savings. Reducing service on the North Bay routes is something that we're looking at, and converting a weekday 10-hour crew to an 8-hour crew would result in some savings, but would have some service impacts. We are planning on continuing to budget a significant amount for the pilot service program. We know the advantages and benefits that that program has yielded for us and will continue to yield. There's lots of interest in it, but it is something that eats into our ability to sustain our regular service to the tune of $2.5 million a year. Fleet downsizing, it's something as we add vessels to the fleet, instead of being in full growth mode, we could consider decommissioning vessels and not having the maintenance obligations associated with those vessels would result in some savings. Longer term strategies that we're looking at include the South San Francisco service restructuring, the Oakland Estuary, not water shuttle service, by the way, but just the Oakland Estuary service that we operate that travels from Main Street to Oakland. That's another route that we might be able to restructure, especially now that we have seaplane in place. There might not be as much of a need for as much service out of the Main Street terminal, and that could result in some savings. Richmond weekend service enhancement, we're doing that right now and investing a little bit more funding in making that happen. And that is something that if it didn't work out and ended up being a route that or a service that's underperforming, if we decide to stop doing that, that would be a long-term strategy that would yield some savings. Modification of the fare program. Right now, we have a fare program that's built around aligning our services with other transit modes that operate in the same corridor. And limiting the amount that fares can be increased every fiscal year. And we could change that program to more aggressively increase fares to help sustain our services over the long term. New revenue sources, the 2026 regional transportation ballot measure is obviously a key part of this equation. We've communicated to the legislators that are working on this effort what our needs are over the next 10 years. It is a 10 to 15-year timeframe that they're looking at. There are larger operators that have more immediate fiscal cliffs than we do, but they're aware that we also have a fiscal cliff that it will happen at some point in the next 10 years, and we've communicated with them what our needs are and what the different services are that would potentially cause that fiscal cliff to happen sooner rather than later. And I believe we will be included at some level in that expenditure plan when that legislation is ultimately approved. There's a lot, as Chair Wonderman mentioned at the start of the meeting, there's a lot of flips of the coin that need to come up heads for that measure to be successful. So even if we're included in the language that's ultimately approved, it's no guarantee that the ballot measure will actually take effect. There are local county transportation measures that are being reauthorized and some new measures that are being considered over this next 10 years. And so that's another area that we can look to. It's successful, obviously, with Contra Costa's Measure J in creating some revenue to support the Richmond service. And that's another place we can look to sustain services to those specific counties. And then private employers and developers, we just talked about that as it relates to the South San Francisco service. That's not the only service that has potential to receive some subsidy from the private sector. Mission Bay sure has a lot of employers, a lot of them growing really quickly, and they have definitely been in touch with us about adding service to that neighborhood at the soonest possible time. So it tells us that they value it, and they are folks that we've talked to about providing some subsidy in the near term and perhaps in a sustained way. So those are things that we're looking at, and we wanted to bring it to the board's attention as you consider the FY26 budget and get your feedback on some of these strategies. Are there things that we should stay away from? Are we on track with the strategies that we're looking at? Are there others that we should be exploring?
Well, thank you. You know, I'd say to kick it off, we have to be responsible fiscal stewards of our system. I'm probably the last person who wants to see us pull back service. It's really the contrary. I'd like to see us add service. I think one of the challenges, the good news is people like riding it and they use it and they're happy with it. We have high passenger satisfaction. We deliver, reliable, safe transit. And we're getting cleaner and greener. I think there's a lot of good that's happening. And, but if there's a problem, it's I didn't take the ferry today. I didn't take the ferry today because when I left the house and I hit the traffic on the Bay Bridge and I looked at when the ferry would be, it wasn't soon enough for me to take it. So I took the Bay Bridge. I drove. And I wouldn't have, I would have preferred to take the ferry, but there's a pretty big gap in there from Oakland at that point, kind of that mid-morning. And, my dream for this agency is really to have service where you don't know the schedule. You never need to know the schedule. You go there and the ferry comes. And you gotta wait. It's, 15 minutes, it's 20 minutes, but it's not, 45 minutes and it's not an hour and 20 minutes, so that's what I'd like to see us be able to achieve. And I realize, we're a long way from that. So, but I'd love to see us figure out how to accomplish that and work toward it, because I think, there's a lot of people who could use a ferry if it was like that, who don't use it because it's not like that. And I also think that the last mile issues that we have historically had, today we're talking about charging people for parking and those kinds of issues, but I think in the future, that's going to be less of a thing. People are going to have more options as to how to get to and from the terminal with, new technologies and new forms of transportation that didn't exist when we created this, these plans a few years ago. So, I suspect that's going to really get a lot better. So, I think in the meantime, we need to think about these things, and we may have to actually do them. But I hope we can, really concentrate on the upside alternatives. There's a number of good ideas there. Whether it's public money, I've always been a fan of going to the developers before they develop their project and say, like Power Station Pier 50, that if you want to build, you need to provide this service, your waterfront development, and there needs to be some kind of a, Melrose type district in place, and, or like in Harbor Bay, like that, this is very viable. But it requires us to be talking to the people who are planning developments along the waterfront and maybe even be part of the waterfront development advocacy, constituency, and so forth. And so I'll leave it at that. I hope we can figure out a way to enhance rather than pull back. But ultimately, the board will have to do the responsible thing. And it's no question that it's getting more expensive out there to do everything. And agencies like public agencies like this, in private businesses feeling this. My members talk about it all the time. We all feel it at home. But for a public agency, it's hard to respond. It's not, we're not, in a position to easily reduce the cost of doing the business. So, for all, and I think this is one of the rubs that we have in the Prop 63 is people are saying that the transit agencies need to tighten their belts. And of course they do. And, we need to look at more efficient ways but I think most of what is actually happened out there is the transit agencies have experienced the same upward cost pressures that everybody's felt in society and will probably continue to feel if tariffs happen and things just get more and more expensive. They're going to get more and more expensive for our transit agencies, and they're not going to have the ability, we are not going to have the ability to engage in meaningful cost controls to the level that perhaps some in the public would like to see happen, right? So we have to be thinking about, as best we can, holding the cost down, but really thinking about, what are some potential revenue enhancements, that we can look for in the future that, that has to be front and center for us. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of pulling back either, but I get that we have to go through this drill to talk about it and realize that it's there. And I think, when you talk about running leaner, I think we run pretty lean still, even though we've expanded. I think our staff deserves the support that we added. I think our people and our employees and labor that's on the ferries deserve to get paid. what other workers get paid doing the same type of work. So I think those are all great things that enhance our agency. And I would hate to see that, be impacted. And I've said this publicly, I've said it privately. It's still just, I just scratch my head over the fact that we have 2 ferry systems on the bay. I think if we're going to be talking about enhancing service and moving forward and asking taxpayers for more money, which I know we witnessed this during Arm 3. Everybody thought, oh, it's going to go down. And I mean, Arm 3 passed in all the counties. I mean, people love the ferry service. It's a good service. And to me, we should be looking not just at enhancing like our going after other streams of revenue, but we should really start to talk with the other agency on the bay about, where can we work together and start to bring services together to provide a better service for everybody that lives on the bay. Because I can tell you, I hear nonstop about the fact that you can't get from Alameda over to Tiburon or to Sausalito. It doesn't make sense. And I don't think it makes sense for the agencies. I don't think it makes sense for the ridership. I don't think it makes sense for our workers. I really truly believe, like, when you look at it and start thinking about it, that there is an actual way to enhance the service, be more fiscally responsible with the service, and provide a service to where we can go to the tax base in the Bay Area and ask for more support and bring more revenue in. And I think it's right there, and it's been right in front of us the whole time. It's just, there's so much resistance, whether it's ego or, whatever it is. I think that conversation needs to start happening, especially, we've been talking about this fiscal cliff now for a few years. And I've talked privately with people, I've talked to labor, I've talked to everybody. I just think at some point, we need to approach a type of committee or sit down and start looking at it as part of our option, and see what we can do. So that's my 2 cents on it. I appreciate all the work. I worked for a public service agency, so I know what it feels like to sit there as the worker, feeling like, somehow, this is your fault, and it's not. So I want to make sure every worker knows that, because I don't think it's, the people that are making $40 an hour aren't the ones that should be the focus here. Really, it's a regional issue, and it's a financial issue, and it's a cost issue of everything going up. So that's what I have to say.
Jessica?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat anything that's been said. I want to just stress that many of the waterfront developments that this future service will serve depend on the ferry. There aren't options. And so I think we need to stress this in the discussions on the regional measure, that this is not, sure, we could cut this service or these plans, but it's not going to serve anyone. It's not going to serve these new waterfront developments. And so it's thinking from a regional perspective that moving people on the bay is an incredibly effective way, an efficient way of moving people, and that we should be part of this regional measure. And that ultimately, if we compare our budget requests to some of the larger regional agencies, it's fairly limited amounts. And so I think we push forward because what we do, it's not in any way growth for the sake of growth. It's growth that serves real needs. And so I think that we need to emphasize that. I really appreciate the work that went into showing us exactly what the impacts are. And so it would be interesting to understand also the agencies and potentially, the involved stakeholders thinking around, if we were to be part of this regional measure, at what point would we need the funds? Do we start collecting the funds immediately, or would it be closer to 2030, for instance? And so seeing the phased approach, we have it partially on the slide, but seeing when we would need each dollar amount and thinking about that so that we're as transparent as we possibly can be. And then Chair Winderman mentioned tariffs, and we have no idea what's going to happen, right? But that could add additional costs to any capital investment. So it's just something we have to continue to keep in our minds, but we need to be transparent and we need to be part of the regional measure. That's my two cents.
Yeah, so I also won't repeat, but I echo everyone's comments. But then I had some questions like, so for example, last week I was in Sacramento and for Ledge Day for the California Association of Realtors, and we met with Lori Wilson, and we were talking about Valero in Benicia and how they are ceasing operations in March of next year. And they've also made indications that they'll be shutting down Wilmington in a couple of years. And she said that because of that, fuel costs are anticipated to rise by approximately $6 to $8 per gallon in the next year. So we could be paying like $10 to $12 per gallon by next summer. So as we look at the fuel costs, are we putting that into the equation? And I just wanted to raise that item to throw that
Yeah,
out
we
there.
have not budgeted that amount or anticipated that amount. And that would be another cost driver that is not reflected in this
Mm.
analysis.
And so I know, she's the only one I've heard working to see if there's some way to keep the refineries open and functional. But just wanted to make maybe fair, council could do some work there too. I don't know.
We're, yes.
Okay, and then just wanted to talk about Vallejo specifically, like, we have the highest ridership. We're Vallejo in Solano County, I should say, we're the most affordable county, like housing cost wise. But we also have the lowest median income of any county in the Bay Area. The ferry is the only direct route to San Francisco for the whole county. So then I just wanted to share, like, so when we're talking about reducing service to Vallejo, and that would be about $500,000. I'm going to bring up my favorite subject, the cost of the lease on the property that we don't use anymore. And there's actually private businesses in that building that would love to expand into our space. And I think it's important that we have conversations with the city of Vallejo to share that, the cost of reducing service is almost equal to the cost of the lease that we're paying for a building we don't use. Public transportation dollars that are going to a city entity that are intended for public transit and are instead paying for a building we don't use. And also wanted to mention, like, as we talked about developers, again, like when we talk about development in Vallejo specifically, you have the same labor costs, you have the same material costs, you have the same development costs in Vallejo as you would anywhere else in the Bay Area, but the return on that investment is different. It's less. And so I certainly would love to have conversations with the developers, like the existing developer on Mare Island. But I also want to share that there is expected to be $70 million in underground infrastructure that needs to happen, that they had federal funds identified for prior to this administration that have now gone away. And so that's a big challenge they're trying to overcome. And then also the city is behind on the waterfront and downtown areas. Solano Transportation Authority has given the city money for doing an update to the specific plans. And they're way behind schedule on even beginning those updates. And it usually is like a 2-year process before they even do an RFP to get a new developer. So that could be some time before we have the opportunity to have conversations with developers about helping us maintain service and expand upon service. I just wanted to share that information.
Thank you.
As you know, I think since we unfortunately have time, it'll just be good to get in place the notion that when the time comes, there'll be some financial commitment that would be made, which would add value to the development. Not that we just want to punish people for developing, because we do an awful lot of that. But, this is, I think this is different. This is enabling to connect Vallejo's waterfront to the rest of the region without having to go over 280 and, do all that stuff that you have to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's just it adds value. I think, to Director Alba's point on transparency, I would say, kind of just take it a step further. I agree with it. And we have to kind of remember why we're here, right? We stood up this agency. Bless you. We stood up this agency, over a generation ago, effectively to grow a new service, grow a new capacity for the region.
Yeah.
And it's meant to be. It was meant to be expansive. It wasn't meant to just stay in place. That's what the legislators wanted, and so they created it for that purpose. And we've been little by little doing it. Could be argued not as quickly as could be, but we've been doing it. And then the public is being really clear about how they feel about it by using the service. So compared to other services, we're far out ahead. The fact that we're 88% recovered daily use from the pandemic in where downtown San Francisco's daytime population is probably 50%, 55% maybe on a warm day when the sun's in the right spot compared to what it was. It says an awful lot. But people are coming and they want this service. And I think, from the polling that we've seen, when you add ferries to the mix, it improves voter responsivity, and support for the measure. So, I don't think we should be shy about this. And I don't think we should forget why, we started this in the first place. So when we talk about the need for additional funds, everybody needs more money. So when I read every month, Ray's report that says that on the $30 million in federal money that we get from the program, and we've got a $20 million plus up request that we have every single year, but there's never been $20 million. Why? What would we do with that additional funds? What is it we're trying to do that requires the public response? So, you can call it transparency, because I think that's what it is, but it's also being really clear about what your mission is and your intention. And I think I really think the public is with us on this. And I do think the big opportunity is in waterfront development. People will use ferries to get to a destination when they don't have to go to the next destination. If there's a way to get to somewhere by ferry, and then the thing that you're doing is there, is always going to be a winner. So, that is whether it's people working or entertainment or some combination, living, all of those things. If it's go to school, we really should be oriented toward doing that. And I don't know that the agency is really there for that yet, but it's something we should talk about. How do we make this, instead of SF Bay Ferry, but like SF Bay Ferry and Development Organization, right? And actually facilitate. And that was the intention, in 2000, whatever year we did the last legislation from Mr. Cowan. I mean, he wanted that out of us, and we didn't get it in the legislation. He wanted eminent domain. He wanted all kinds of fun stuff that we should have. So now we don't have that, so we have to negotiate with folks on the land side for everything, which probably is reasonable enough. But there's ways to maybe facilitate that, and I'd be really interested to see us figure out how to be more dynamic in that way, because I think that's where the real finance is, and the real bigger, jumps in ridership is that kind of thing. So, and I think it's good for the Bay Area. We just need to reclaim that waterfront and put it to use again. And we're the key. So I always feel like, we're not running a transportation agency here. Of course, we're doing that, but we're actually, we're really a major part of the future design of our region and the improvement of its lifestyle. and its attractiveness. So, all right, I've railed on long enough. Other folks on the board, any other thoughts? And thanks for all your comments. Members of the public, anybody have thoughts about this? No, anybody,
Nobody has signed up.
anyone feel like making a comment? If not, we'll close off 11. Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, it's a little, it's a little daunting, but we'll overcome. So item 12, review proposed fiscal year 2025-26 budget and salary schedule.
Yes.
Great, here we are again, another fiscal year. All right, so just a reminder about the process. As with every year, we have, today is just an information item. And then next month, we come back with the completed item with all the resolutions that are required as part of the budget. And I just want to take a minute to give a shout out to the team in the village, because every single person worked since January on this. And as you know, the budget's getting bigger and bigger. And so it's more and more complicated every year, particularly on the funding side. But this year was a particular challenge because we're growing so much so fast. So thanks to everybody for all their hard work on it. So just a couple, all of the information in today's presentation is in your packet. Just trying to give it to you in smaller snippets. This is just the overview of what is in your budget this year. We have continued growth in ridership and revenue. We don't propose any significant change in regular service. We're continuing the one major pilot, the Alameda estuaries, Oakland estuary shuttle. We do have some smaller limited pilots that aren't called out separately, but they are budgeted for ballpark service through out of Richmond and enhanced weekend service that Tom has mentioned in the past. We also have the arrival of our 4th Dorado class vessel, the Zalafas. He has to always tell me how to say that. And then we have implementation of a much bigger electrification program than last year and the year before. We're really getting into construction now, as you know. And then I'll just mention at the end, remind you of the reserves that we built during this fiscal year and what's available to us going forward. And then just the two kind of sobering facts is the one that Seamus mentioned, which is we're continuing to see bridge toll revenue not being what we need it to be or what we hoped it would be by now. For example, RM3, which we are entitled to 35 million, is not quite that high anymore, and we're still not to our pre-pandemic RM2 levels. And so that's I'll have a slide on that, and there's a diagram in your packet as well on that. And then, as Seamus mentioned, that's sort of seen in the context of these rising labor and capital costs. So it is just sort of that intersection between those two things going in different directions, basically, is all that's trying to say. Shout out to our new budget analyst, Hector, for this swanky chart. This is just an overview of the sources and uses for the budget this year. On the left-hand side, you see the revenues, and it's nice because you can, it's like a pie chart, but, the 2025 version, it shows you that bridge toll is so important to us in everything that we do. And we still have quite a, despite what's going on in Washington, we still have a lot of federal funds, and that's really all capital now because we've used up all of our COVID money. And then the smaller pots of money. And then you can see on the right-hand side, more than 50% of our budget now is anticipated to be capital project expenses, with the next big chunk being our ferry services and the biggest, compared to planning, for example. And I'll go into each of these in the next few slides, just very briefly. So the operating budget on the expense side is $81 million this year. That's up from 75 million last year. Operations alone are 74.5 million. And I have a breakdown of the functions on the next. Me and the dogs will break it down on the next slide. The budget assumes almost 38,000 operating hours, which is similar to the current year, as well as vessels traveling over 593,000 operating miles. And this donut chart shows you the sort of the breakdown of Vallejo being the most expensive, followed by Oakland and Richmond and beyond. And it also shows you sort of the proportion of planning administration or a demonstration project, for example, compared to some of the other the routes, just that overview of what goes into operating service. And then looking at it from a different point of view, these are the components of what it takes to run ferry service, with labor and fuel being the biggest chunk of what we do. Those top two charts together, amount to almost $40 million, which is more than half. So those are kind of the drivers to your point. And we found this 2-3 years ago when fuel costs jumped unexpectedly, and they're down now. So it's a very volatile input, and it is really hard to predict. And it does depend on so many different factors. And labor, we've talked a little bit about, and we've talked about how the new negotiations and the new contracts have increased crew costs by up to 4 million, which is a significant 21% increase year over year. So that's driving most of the increase this year, although there are other costs that are going up. For example, our use of R99 fuel, which is a very environmentally good way to use diesel fuel, but it requires more filters, more equipment, and we're having to spend more money next year putting in filters and replacing filters and doing those things that are necessary for that. And we will have more vessels in service, as Seamus mentioned. So the more vessels you have, you just have more. And so some of those other costs, it's an on average 10% increase year over year. So it is what it is. And then just that small slice of the donut that I showed you, which is planning administration, is a $6.3 million budget. It's 8% of our overall operating costs, which I think is a reasonable number for most agencies. In the staffing, which is the biggest portion of it, that top, the colors don't come out very well on this, I'm just noticing, but that's 50% of the budget. You can see the percents. That helps you with figuring out the donut. There are no new positions. As you know, we added several new positions in the last budget and in the year before, and so we're holding that steady. I think we are almost fully staffed now. We've been hiring like crazy and getting people in place, but no new positions. And in the salary chart, there's assumed a 2.7% COLA, which is based on the CPI, the last CPI index that we got. The only other two things I wanted to point out about planning and admin is that we are making a significant investment in our IT infrastructure, just for staff as well as for operations. In the last budget, you approved a new IT position for us, and we are increasing our IT budget by 44%, which sounds like a lot, but it's not that much money. It's a very small amount of our budget, but it's super important with cybersecurity and all of the things that are going on, trying to make sure that we are totally covered there. And we're really excited about some of the changes that our new IT manager is implementing. And then the other thing is, we talked two meetings ago, or I guess last meeting, around the new lease at Beale Street. And we are assuming that new lease in the budget. We are assuming we're going to be moving August, September timeframe. We have not received any good word from the port on being able to get out of our current lease. So right now the budget is carrying both leases, but we are going to work on trying to figure out a way to either sublet or mitigate that cost. And so this is sort of the worst case scenario that those lease costs, which are showing up as $700,000 in this figure, we're hoping we can mitigate that before we reach that point. And then in your board packet, there's a write-up of all the different work plan items that everybody's going to be working on. There's a couple pages of snippets of everything that everybody's, not everything, but the highlights of what everyone is going to be working on in the coming year. And then just a It's because you came up here.
Magic touch.
Yeah. Okay, so just a little bit about the funding sources for operation. Once again, bridge toll revenues is big driving factor. 57 million of our $81 million is bridge toll. And I have a couple more slides about our two biggest sources, bridge tolls and fare revenues. I'll just pull those up real quickly, and then the rest are just the smaller amounts that, you know, Contra Costa is for Richmond service, and then we have state transit assistance, which help pays for everything. So in terms of fare revenue, the ridership number you see up there, we're projecting 3,032,000 and change in riders next year, and that's an 18% increase compared to the current year. It also includes the water shuttle, and this also shows you the ridership breakdown, with Vallejo being the biggest, followed very close behind by Alameda, Oakland. And then the fare revenue that generates, let me just mention that would bring us to 94% of 2019 levels. So that's pretty significant to be at 94%, I think. And so in terms of fare revenue, we're projecting 15.8 million, which is more than the 14 million we had last year. So it's a 12% year-over-year increase. And again, you can see Vallejo is 45% of fare revenue, followed by Alameda, Oakland, and then beyond after that. And then our other most important revenue source, bridge tolls, this is in your packet as well, $57 million bridge toll funding for operation. 41 million of that is RM3 revenue. So very, very important to us. If we did not have this, we would be with Muni and the others in really hard shape. 31 million of that is sort of the annual allocation. 9.8% is coming from our saved money from the 5 years of the lawsuit. And then for RM2, it's only 16 million, which is $2 million less than we are sort of entitled to, but it's just a result of the way the revenues have been coming in. So it's unfortunate. And then this just shows you the two different bars are, one is, just showing you how much of that funds planning administration, and the other, most of that is for operating. That's all this one's showing you. And then just a brief word on reminding you where we are with reserves. Last year, you approved a reserve policy, and you approved in the budget a process by which we drew down more state operating revenue that was being held in reserve for us at MTC. So we're pulling all that money month by month into our accounts and keeping it as a substitute for fare revenue, and fare revenue is going into our reserve. So by the end of the fiscal year, so by July 1, we do anticipate to have an $18 million in-house reserve, which is really good. It means we can access it at any time for anything. And then we also have external reserves of ST. We still have some money in our STA account at MTC, 4.5 million, and that's not including the 3 million that's assumed in the budget. So we will get the 3 million, and we'll still have this 4.5 million. And then RM3 operating funds, that reserve account that's again left over from the lawsuit year, there will still be $70 million in that account. But so that's the account that we would draw on in the coming years during this whole fiscal cliff, how long will we be able to survive? And it really is just kind of this interplay between RM3 revenues, which aren't yet at 35 million, which we hoped would be there, this year, and they're just right now, they're not projecting that. So we're hoping they're wrong, but that's all we could budget for.
Can I ask a quick question on that? So
Yeah.
why do we think the bridge toll revenues, in some ways it's good if the bridge toll revenues are on there, 'cause it means less people are driving. But are less people driving because the tolls were raised? So there's sort of a utility issue there. Are they down because the economy is slower and they're not going as many places? Are they down because they're taking the ferry and BART and, other means to get across the bay because public transit's improved, so they've got better alternatives? Like why, or what's our theory on this? Because it's a hard one for us to be a cheerleader for.
Right,
People paying more tolls,
right.
right? And we can quietly amongst ourselves under the cone of silence here say that we wish more people paid bridge tolls, but
Right.
Theoretically we want less people to be driving and taking the ferry, which would speak to deriving more from the ferry fares. But if you raise the fares, there's a utility theory on that too. Then people will, maybe then they'll drive and want more money. I don't know. What do you
Yeah.
think?
I haven't done a deep dive. I do know that, there are certain days where there's just as much traffic as there used to be, right? But it's not 5 days a week, right? To the extent you have people who are still only doing 3 days a week, that's a big part of the drivers, I believe. I don't know, Seamus, if you get in the
No,
same.
that's it. It's the same thing affecting transit ridership is affecting travel generally. And it's work from home, no need to cross a bridge if you're working remotely.
Is it declining, the bridge toll? At one point, we Bay Area Council were reporting that bridge tolls were pretty much back to 100% pre-pandemic. I don't know if they ever hit 100, but in your report, they're 86, so that's a pretty big gap. Are they on the decline?
We have not declined. There was one year where it was flat. Not this past year, but the year before that, or sort of February, March timeframe. They were telling us they might have to claw money back, and they ended up not having to do that, but it ended up just being kind of a flat year. So 23 to 24, I think it was.
Yeah, and the Bay Bridge has approached 100% of pre-pandemic commuters, but not the other bridges. And so those other bridges are bringing the number region-wide.
Got to start charging the people with the bikes on the Richmond Center Bell. But they don't allow enough cars to go for us. We don't have to go there. Thanks.
Sure. Just a couple more slides. Just want to talk about capital for a minute. Gary is here with his team, and they worked really hard this year on tackling the Beast Biz, our capital program, which is now a $496 million program. It's humongous.
Wow.
It's a humongous for an agency that just a few years ago, it was less than 100 million. So this sort of, again, is the sources and uses chart that or figure that shows you we are still getting, that's where all the federal funds are that you saw in the first figure. Bridge tolls still important, 32 million. We have quite a few state funds, which is really nice, mostly TIRCP. We have some local money. And then I'm going to talk about the unfunded amount, the $8 million. But then on the right-hand side, you can see that over half of the investments that we're making are for vessels. 16% for repair and replacement of our vessels, and 37% for the electric vehicle contracts that you approved over the last few months, the 3 small 150 passenger vessels and the 2 400 passenger vessels. And then about 38% on facility electrification in general is up there at the top. So you can see there's a lot going on, but these are the big categories that we are planning for in the next year. And then talking about the funded status of these. Over 77% of the program is funded. We have secured $381 million, which is a staggering number to have have gotten, and we're really proud of that. We still need 115 million. So we have some work to do. And most of that 115 million is for the REAP program, almost all of it is. And the REAP program, the subset of REAP's program is $404 million out of that bigger program. So what I've tried to do here is kind of like a lot of information on one slide, but just to show you that we do have $300 million of RM3 funding. So if we wanted to, we could tap RM3 for that entire amount, but that has not been our strategy to date, and that's not something we want to do because that money is needed for more vessels. It's needed for more things that we don't even know we need yet. And so what we have been doing to date is trying to leverage those funds to go get more funds, and then to use those monies as a backstop when, you know, we can't quite get over the line. So for example, with the vessels contracts that you awarded this year, you know, we got to the point where we needed to keep going, and so we used the RM3 to fill those gaps. So right now, I know Director Alba, you've asked this question, and I've been trying to get you the answer, and we now have it. Right now, we have $89 million worth of commitments against that 300 million. So a little less than a third of that program is spoken for. So we're just continuing to work through that. And in that earlier chart where I mentioned that we have about $8.4 million for this fiscal year that's unfunded, we're still working through all of the estimates and working through the strategies of what happened as part of this budget process is that the engineers did a lot of work around reevaluating all the cost estimates for everything, particularly in light of the vessel projects coming in so much higher, and lo and behold, the cost of everything is going up, and with tariffs and everything going on, we're just trying to figure out how to deliver all of these projects. And so in the case where we've authorized spending that's not funded right now, we're controlling that through the use of contracts, task orders, and not authorizing anything that's not funded, but we wanted to go ahead and include it in the budget for now because it's a continuum of a project that if we can solve some of these funding gaps, we will either come back to you with an RM3 allocation for that additional 8 million, or we'll just hold that project back until we figure out a bigger fundraising strategy. Most of the, most of the holes are now around these, the charging infrastructure that's needed, right? Because we've already funded all the vessels. So it's really just working through all of the, the challenges of doing something big and new and innovative. And every day is a new day in the engineering world. Yeah, I think that's my last slide. Yeah. So I'll just stop there and see if you have any questions.
Thank you. Well, that's a total, very comprehensive report, and it is, it's positive in some ways and it's a little sobering in other ways, and I think causes us to have to think about strategically how we can kind of stay ahead of this curve going forward. So, having been heavily involved in crafting Regional Measure 3, it was certainly our hope and expectation that we would get up to that 35 million a year, which, didn't make every transit agency or politician thrilled about, but we pushed really hard. We pushed really hard for it and got there. And so, be interesting to think about from a market standpoint, what's the likelihood of kind of getting back to that number? Like, when will we achieve that, or will we achieve that number? So,
it seems if we're not that far off
yeah,
right
a couple
now.
of million, right?
Yes, it's a couple million. So next year would be good. Maybe this, who knows, with all the return to work mandates happening, maybe.
Maybe we need a GoFundMe account.
Right.
Something like that.
Everybody.
Any questions, comments from the board on the budget? So next month you'll come back with the actual
The resolution.
with the resolutions to firm it up.
Double check all the dots and T's and.
Yeah. I think it's important that we beefed up the team to make it a really professional, realistic operation to do what we're trying to do. And, this capital, this capital budget's a serious thing. And the projects within it are not necessarily easy projects, right? There are some things that haven't really been done before or not been done here. So, there's a lot to what's going on at this agency, and it's good to have a team that can do it. At the same time, to see that you haven't increased the staffing going into next year is, it shows some restraint. So, all right, well, thank you. Go ahead.
Just on the fuel costs, obviously, like, I don't know what your thoughts are about that, but if that comes to be, that certainly would be a huge impact on us. So I don't know how we plan or prepare for that.
Yeah, we usually conservatively budget for fuel and almost always have savings at year end. I think we will have savings at this year end, but the magnitude of it is pretty serious. It would really, just off the top of my head right now, what we have sort of this theory around if we have crews that are paid for, let's run another service, even if the ridership is not super large because there's no cost of that. But if fuel, the cost of fuel is becoming more and more of a factor, then that changes that dynamic, and routes that are considered efficient won't be as efficient anymore. And I mean, that will really impact those decisions that we tend to make during the year to kind of tweak service and say, hey, we think we could do another run here, then it no longer works. So it's a challenge. It's one of the challenges. I would say on that topic, just as we work through all these issues and on the strategic planning, costs going up and solutions, really, in the end, in my experience, it's going to be a myriad of things that we work through. There's not going to be like a revenue measure that solves everything, and there's not going to be a development that solves everything, right? It's going to be, let's do 10 solutions, and each of them is going to help us enough to get us over together they'll all work together and get us where we need to be. And, if we're faced with something as big as a magnitude change, right, we'll have to put our heads together. Yeah.
Great. Other comments, thoughts? Just got an article here from a professor at USC saying $9 a gallon as a result of not just the Valero, but the closing of Phillips 66 in the Southland. So, we're something we really do need to work on this. This is pretty daunting.
We need those electric boats.
Yeah, well, we need those electric boats, but we won't have them yet.
Yeah, we have a couple of years for that solution.
I just want to say thank you for putting together such a clear, concise report for us, and making this so tangible. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Great. Members of the public on the budget. Anyone signed up to talk about the budget?
No one has signed up.
Anyone want to talk about the budget? Nobody wants to talk about the budget. Nobody wants to talk. We will close item 11, and thanks Aaron and team. I know everybody put a lot of work into this, and it's very clear, and good job. We appreciate it. Item number 13, that was 12. 13 is public comments for non-agenda items. So, having not heard too much, except for you, thank you for coming up and speaking, and you. It's nice to hear from the public, actually. I like to hear from the public. Anyone would like to comment on something that wasn't on the agenda today? Isn't? Go ahead.
Is anyone signed up?
No.
This one is probably better for last meeting, but about the Woodstock, I just want to make a positive comment about really enjoying the Woodstock Alameda service, and that it goes pretty late. I was able to kind of use it as a result to do a crazy little BART bike to Richmond terminal, Richmond to San Francisco to Alameda seaplane, and then after dinner with my family, use the bike and then take it back to Oakland, then bark home to Berkeley. So it's really nice to have things
Yeah,
that
I really
like
like this stuff.
Alameda is definitely not really accessible except by Posey Tube, which is
Yeah.
so wanted to give a positive comment to that. And also just like hearing conversation about like why your Bay Area connections and stuff is really exciting, or like obviously budget wise there's a lot of things that make that difficult, but the fact that the ferry service is one that's able to kind of create a has more flexibility in creating a wider Bay Area continuity of transit than really any other service. It's yeah, definitely it's been interesting to see because San Francisco sucks a lot of the air out of a lot of conversations, but it does kind of seem like connections between wider Bay Area and the fact that like Vallejo isn't really accessible from anything but the ferry service. And so I personally love to see in the future, should it ever be possible, more service between like non-San Francisco terminals just to each other, because it'd be really nice to see that, but obviously a lot of constraints. Anyways, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're a true regionalist.
Yes.
Love it. Okay, other members of the public wish to speak on item 13, public comments for non-agenda items?
No.
Okay, hearing none, we are going to go into closed session.